Hi, my name is Bijoy Ramachandran, and I'm a partner at Hundredhands, an architectural studio in Bangalore. Um, we've been very fortunate to work with Shilpa, Sujan, Arijit, Vishnu, and their teams on this proposal for the Council of Architects Center of Excellence in Bangalore. Um, there are two primary ideas that have come out of these conversations we've had with Shilpa and her team for this project. The first is, the idea that the land comes first. With regards to her own approach to design, we've learned an incredible amount about the sensitivity to the way topography is formed over time because of water and because of the trees, that in the assimilation or in the understanding of how the terrain has been formed, that then gives us the basis for architecture in the way that buildings are sited on the ground, in the way that they respond to terrain, in the way that they're formed with regards to their organization and geometry. That there is a really inherent relationship between the reading of the topography and the way that buildings operate on the ground. Their relationships to the floor, the relationship to the sky, their response to landscape, and the accommodation of these existing conditions in the way that the plans are made. That's been really instructive for us, and working with Shilpa has brought that to bear, in very visceral ways for us. It's been fantastic. The other incredible idea about, I mean, the way that she structured, this response to the call, is essentially, the word multiplicity kind of operates at many levels in this project. So the first is the idea of multiple authors. It's very, very interesting, this group of people, a lot of young designers coming together, of course, with an oldie like myself, that we bring to bear, all of our own predilections, our own prejudices, and we work together to come to some sort of consensus. And there can be no better model for architectural practice, I think, that, the collaboration, coming together of many people to make something of value. And that's something that's really dear to us in our firm, this notion of a collaborative response, that everybody coming together. And so even in the way that she structured this process with her friends and with us, that she's trying to bring, or to make a space for this confluence of many voices. So it is really, in that sense, a wonderful example of how maybe the future of our practices could operate in a very, very challenging and difficult sort of time that we are facing. Multiplicity also operates in terms of how she and the team have thought about, accommodating a very, very demanding program on this site. So by splitting up the program into multiple buildings, each of them designed by, one of the teams, that you operate on the site with a much smaller, in a way, a much smaller footprint, if you will, that you have smaller buildings spread over the site. And so that then gives us the opportunity of creating much more intimate and centralized open space, that is a space for meeting, a space for congregation, a space for chance encounters, that the buildings then become the backdrop for the life of this institution. It reminds me a lot, at least the original sketches that I had seen from their team, the plan reminds me of NIFT, which I think is one of those great plans which tells us about the congregational value of that in-between space, a found space, if you will, unearthing an existing geological condition. I mean, really, that's the memory I had at the moment, I saw the first sketches for the project. So that multiplicity, the idea of multiple different, buildings operating on the site and creating places of confluence and congregation. Multiplicity is also another idea that features in the way that she's thinking about the palette, or the way that, over discussions that all of us are thinking about the palette of materials, that rather than a kind of singular palette, or few materials, that the building is really made up of multiple things, different kinds of materials put together in different kinds of ways. But they're inherent in that is this wonderful idea that maybe many of these materials are found materials, that they're the detritus of other, building construction sites, that we try and salvage a lot of this material for the floor, for some of the cladding, that these are, stone or brick or wood, that, this is made out of a pastiche, if you will, of all of these materials. And so really it is a job of the architect as a curator, that you're bringing to bear all of this stuff that you found from elsewhere, that then you're putting together to make these buildings. And that's a profound idea for how maybe we can build things in the future, that we're not sort of, depending on the pristine, superfine, precisely cut elements, but that we're trying to put together buildings that are kind of an assemblage of found things. So that's multiplicity in another sense of the word. There is also the idea of, the multiplicity, the idea of um, uh, that the response to the ground is also not always the same. That there are multiple ways in which one responds to this terrain that one has found. That it isn't a benign sort of notion of how you would accommodate the water. That there are places where the buildings may be embedded in the ground, and these have their roots in a more philosophical idea of what the buildings are. So the architecture of the auditorium has in and of itself this idea of an embedded object, that the ground of the auditorium and the surfaces of the auditorium are actually an extension of the ground, whereas the housing has a much more a tentative response to the ground, creating a kind of well underneath, a kind of place for meeting, a place for congregation, a place for eating or hanging out with friends. That's created out of some sort of a colonnade, reminding me maybe of the Lepakshi temple, that you have this ground, but then on this ground is then made out of the same material, a kind of place for pause, a place for meeting. And that's it's nice that these buildings are responding to the ground in the character of the authors of these buildings, that they're the way that they meet friends, or that the way that they engage with other people, that in the response to the ground, each of these architects have brought to bear their own ideas of how people meet and spend time with each other. So that, I think, is also interesting. So at the heart of it are these two ideas: the land as the genesis, or the generator of everything. That in that response, one finds the way of making architecture, and the idea of multiplicity. That there are many voices in this project, which I think is a fantastic example for the way one should be practicing in this day and age, and all of the things with regards to the materials and occupation of the ground, and that multiplicity. So I hope you enjoy the project. We really enjoyed our conversations as a group. Wonderful to reconnect with Shilpa after such a long time, and also to meet Arijit and Vishnu and Sujan and their teams in making this project. Thank you.